Hey you guys, it's Peter, and welcome to my channel, Peterisms, where I tell stories of my life and just little things that I have learned as I have grown into the person that I am today. And today I want to talk about codependency because I got this comment on my video. Let me fix the camera real quick. I got this comment on a video that I did a couple days ago. It was on my Stop Complaining video, and I got this comment, and somebody asked me to talk about codependency. And codependency is something that I love to talk about because I think it was something that I didn't really understand for many, many years. Even when I was reading like the book Codependent No More by Melody Beatty, and then the Sister Meditation book, which I've read so many of over here, the Language of Letting Go, which I absolutely love. I'll get back to some meditations. If you guys want some meditations over here, let me know in the comment section below. But codependency is something that I didn't really understand, and I would read definitions about it, and like I related to it, and I would read Codependent No More, and it really helped me define my relationships with like family, my relationships. So I would highly recommend Codependent No More. If you're anybody that feels that you might struggle with some codependency in any way, shape, or form, I would highly, to be honest with you, other than like basic text of a 12-step program, Codependency No More changed my life. I mean, the way that I looked at relationships that I had with people, with like coworkers, with friends, with neighbors, with family members, and especially with romantic partners. But I can remember reading it the first time, and I don't know, I think it was maybe my defenses and my needing to be in a relationship that stopped me from really seeing truly myself as being codependent in romantic relationships. I don't think that I ever really saw that. In fact, it wasn't until years later, you know, like 8 years ago, I can't remember how long ago Alex and I started marriage counseling, maybe 9 years ago. But it wasn't, maybe longer than that, 10 years ago. It wasn't until then that I don't know, it was when I was on YouTube, I think. So, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, when we first started marriage counseling, and I was having an individual session with our counselor, that I truly, truly understood myself as being codependent. And I didn't really understand it before, even though I had heard all these definitions and stuff. So I want to read to you the comment, and then I want to read to you what codependency is. So somebody left me this comment and said, Peter, please talk about how to refrain from being codependent. I would really like to hear your take on this. Thank you. So I wanted to look up for you the definition of codependency. Excessive emotional or psychological reliance on a partner, typically one who requires support on account of an illness or addiction. So it would be like when we talk about codependency with addiction, right? We talk about that it's almost kind of like we need to control that person's life, whether that person be a spouse or a child or a parent or whatever. It's like when you read the book Codependent No More, she goes in there and talks about like, I remember this story about this woman and her husband was getting drunk like every single night. And so she would say things like, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to buy you like a 6-pack of beer. And you can have a 6-pack of beer. And that's all you can have. And he'd say, okay, thank you. But then like he would get to the 6th beer and then he would like be like, I'm going to the liquor store. I'm getting more. I'll be back tomorrow or something like that. Right. And she would be so upset about it. She's like, I don't understand why you just can't follow these rules. Well, because to an alcoholic and an addict, 1 is too many and 1,000 is never enough. Like once you get started, you're not going to stop. Right. And to not being an alcoholic or an addict, you don't really understand that. And so when you're codependent in a relationship, and when you talk, like when Melody Beatty talks about codependency, she's talking about codependency from an addictions point of view, but she also goes in and talks about it just, and not in an illness or an addictions point of view, of just us defining ourselves off of our need of somebody else, or what we see as like they need us, right? Or we need them. We don't feel like we really can continue to survive if we don't have this person in our life. Like, what am I going to do if this person's not in my life? And so then what we're doing is we're defining our own existence by somebody else. We don't stand alone. We don't have our own life. Like, it's like, I don't know how I'll continue to live if this person's not there, or if I don't need to take care of them, or they don't need me to take care of them. It's like, we don't know who we are without this relationship with this other person. And often that can be somebody that's sick. Often that can be somebody that's an addict. But many times it's just our unhealthy need to define ourselves through our relationships with other people, you know? And so that was something that I started to understand. The way that I really truly understood it after reading the books, after reading the meditation books for years on end, and really understanding what codependency was, and being able to even see my part in it with other people, right? But with romantic partners, I really struggled to see it. Even though I knew I was codependent, I mean, I could feel it, right? I could feel that, like, that pull, like, I don't know what I'm going to do without them. But I couldn't really see how to fix it. And so I was in an individual session. I feel like I've shared this so many times over here. I was in an individual session, and our therapist said to me, what will you do if, like, you and Alex don't make it? Like, if you guys end up getting divorced? And I could not see that as an option, which is so interesting because I can remember standing in this very bedroom and Alex said, we're either going to go to therapy or we're going to get divorced, but this is not working anymore. And there were so many things that were, I mean, we weren't talking, we weren't communicating. There were so many things that were wrong at that point. And honestly, my fear of getting divorced was greater than my fear of therapy. I really didn't want to go to therapy, which is so interesting with my history, you know, of recovery and therapy and things like that, that I didn't want to go to therapy. But I thought, I was kind of afraid of what might come out, if you want to know the truth. I was afraid of, like, you know, we're going to have so much to deal with that I don't know that I'm going to want to really face it. And I think, honestly, this is why a lot of couples just, it's an easier route sometimes to separate and get divorced, because I think there's so much to fix. I can tell you, walking into therapy, I thought there was so much to fix. I thought it was unfixable, if you want to know the truth. I just was like, there's so much that has built up between us. And what's interesting is, by having gone through that and then really looking at each of those parts, you know, and looking at, it's like carrying this huge bag, right? And there's like 50 bricks in it, and each brick represents an issue that you have. Like, we would take a brick out and we would work on it, you know, until we were done with that brick. And then we'd carry another brick until the bag was empty. What I didn't know was, by working through all those things, it made our relationship 100 times stronger. Like, I never would have expected that, you know? I was scared. I was scared of having to have difficult conversations in therapy. I was scared of having to face what it might look like with my life without my husband. You know, I couldn't imagine what that would be like. And so, when I had that conversation with my therapist, and he was like, well, what if this doesn't work? Like, what if you guys, because what we said when we went to therapy was we were going to give it our all for a year. And at the end of the year, if we weren't any closer, if things weren't worked out, then we were going to go our separate ways. We weren't going to continue to, like, you know, put ourselves through this. We were going to let each other go amicably and just be like, have the best life ever, right? But, like, we're obviously not working. So 7 years later, or whatever, 8 years later, we're still together and things are 10 times better than they were ever, right? So that, I think, is testament to how much therapy really, really worked. But at that time, I can remember thinking to myself, I cannot imagine a life where I'm not with my husband. And, you know, each of us, my husband and I, this was a huge part of therapy, this was a huge issue in our relationship, was that we both brought baggage from our past relationships into this relationship. I think that's common. I don't think that, I mean, that's something that people say, don't bring your baggage in, but I think it's like, how do you not, you know? In my past relationship, one of the things that was the hardest for me was that he was also, like, really, like, we did everything together, and he was such an integral part of my life. That's why it's so important for me that Alex and myself both have our own independence in this relationship, because I didn't really know who I was outside of my relationship with my ex. And I can remember the day that we broke up, and I remember the date, I remember the moment, and I had come through the door, and the conversation, and I can remember, like, coming home that day, I was thinking to myself, I wonder what movie we'll watch tonight, like, what food we'll get, you know, and I kept on thinking to myself, if we can just make it, because Christmas was always so great for us. I was like, if we can just make it through Christmas, things will be better on the other side. We got in this cabin in Gatlinburg. We were going there with my mom and stuff like that. And I can remember I walked in, it was like it was December 7th. And I walked in, and he just was like, he was like flipping through channels on the TV. And I came in, and I had, like, my bag on my shoulder, and he said, you need to make a decision. Like, we're either gonna stay together and make this work, or we're done. Because, like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. And he wouldn't even look at me. I can remember my bag just fell off my shoulder, and I just was like, I think it's over, you know? And I didn't even know that I was gonna be saying those words an hour before. And I'll never forget, like, he looked at me and he stood up, and it just was like, we both kind of panicked. And he was, like, throwing stuff in a bag, like, I gotta get out of here. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to break up. I didn't know how to fix it. He didn't want to break up. He didn't know how to fix it. But what was so scary to me was in that moment that we were so close and knew each other so well. Really always better friends, I think, than romantic partners. But in that second, he was no longer in my life. And so when that question was asked to me, and that was one thing that I had said to people, that, like, when you break up with somebody, in that moment, they are no longer in your life. Like, they were everything in your life 2 seconds before, and 2 seconds after, they're no longer in your life at all. And I was so scared of that, you know? And so it took me a long time to be okay after that breakup. I didn't, like, people say, like, who broke up with who? I don't know that I think it really matters. I think I was just the one to say the words first. Later, my ex said to me, I would have broken up with you if you hadn't said the words first, because I think we were both there. And I agree with that. I think it was just who was going to say the words first, you know? I think we both knew it was over. I also believe that if we had gotten therapy years before, I don't know that we couldn't have made it work, you know? But that was such a sad thing for me, that this person that I loved so much and I respected so much and I cared so much about, that in the blink of an eye was just literally out of my life. And that was the case, you know? And so when my therapist asked me, what would you do if you and Alex didn't make it? I immediately went back to that moment in time and thought, like, I can't have another moment where one day Alex and I are playing in bed with the dogs and 2 seconds later he's gone and leaving here and not in my life anymore. We're not talking and I'm not checking in and texting him and we're not planning a trip. And like, it was so scary to me. I didn't know who I was without him. And I think as an only child who had lost his mother, you know, at that point and didn't have a lot of friends, like, it was scary to me. It was really, really scary to me. And so, you know, I said to him, I wouldn't be okay. Like, I don't know. He goes, how would you, like, would you be okay? And I said, no, I wouldn't be okay at all. Like, I don't know how it was said. But anyway, I was like, no, I wouldn't be okay. Like, I don't know how. And he kept on saying, but eventually you'd be okay. No, I wouldn't eventually be okay. He's like, you're not going to continue to live in this forever. Like, eventually you'd be okay. And I can remember it took like 10 or 15 minutes. And finally I was like, I saw this image of myself, like, doing something without Alex and him not, like, being, you know, that part. Now, I want to say this because a lot of people always are like, well, Alex does a lot of stuff without Peter and Peter does a lot of stuff without Alex and blah, 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 blah. Before that moment, like, in time, Alex and I did everything together. Like, we went out, every meal we ate together. You know, I took him food to work. Like, we went out together on weekends. We did everything together. And it felt very enmeshed. And it felt very similar to my past relationship. And I brought that in here because that's all I knew. One of the things that we have really found important, and this has come from therapy, is that we both need to have our own independent lives, which is so interesting to me because when I first got out of treatment, I was dating this guy, and I thought this guy was the dream boat of the century, right? And I can remember my therapist at that time having a session with him, and I can remember saying, don't you think we're so perfect? Like, we're so alike. We like all the things. We want to do all the things together, blah, 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 whatever, which is interesting because he lived in Illinois at the time and I lived in Indiana. And he was like, no, I don't think that's a perfect relationship at all. He was very direct with me, this therapist. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, I think, and he went like this. He goes, I think that I think a perfect relationship is when two people have individual lives and they meet in the middle. He goes, and they share certain things, but they have their own interests and their own things. I don't know that I got that until that moment sitting in that therapy office. I mean, we're talking 20 years. I don't know that I got that. What he said to me my first day, you know, my first week out of treatment or something like that. I don't know that I really understood that. It took me all those years to understand that. That's why it's so purposeful for Alex and I that we have our own lives. We have our own interests, you know, that we get to miss each other. Like Alex said to me early on, he's like, we see each other so much, you don't ever give me a chance to miss you. You know, and I'm like, well, why would you want to miss me? You know, and that's part of the codependency. Like, why would you want to miss me when you can be together all the time? He's like, there's excitement in missing somebody, you know? I get that today, you know? If my husband goes out to dinner, I'm like, I can't wait for him to come home, but I also enjoy my time alone, you know? So it took like 10 or 15 minutes in this session, and finally I was like, I had this image of myself, like, being by myself, and I was like, yeah, I guess I would be okay. I could be okay. I could imagine myself like in a little apartment or something. You know, I was like, I'd be okay. And he's like, so you don't need Alex? And I was like, no, I don't need Alex. And he was like, and Alex doesn't need you, which I think that was almost harder to hear than me saying, I don't need Alex. And I was like, no. And he goes, so you choose Alex to be in a relationship with, and he chooses to be in a relationship with you. And I said, yeah. And he goes, isn't it more powerful to choose to be in a relationship with somebody than to need to be in a relationship with them? And I was like, whew. I mean, that was like a moment, right? I was like, damn. Like, yeah, absolutely. I'd rather somebody choose me than need me, right? Like, that's, I don't know, need is a sickness and choosing is a choice. Like, that's powerful, right? And it was in that moment that I was like, okay, I kind of see this for what it is. Later in doing work, and in work with my current therapist as well, we talked a lot about how my entire life, ever since I came out, I always defined myself by having a man next to me that needed me and that I was good enough, okay, that if a man was standing next to me and I had a boyfriend or I had somebody that desired me, then what that meant was that I was good enough to be a boyfriend. I was good enough to be desired, you know? I can remember standing in a bar, I don't know why I'm thinking of this, but I can remember standing in a bar with Alex and one of his like best friends from college, like the first month or two that we dated. And this guy was like kind of like checking me out. He's like a really good friend of ours. So, well, good friend of Alex's, but he's a good friend of ours too. He lives in Chicago. And I can remember he like kind of checking me out and all this kind of stuff. And he was like, okay, let me see. Is he like a Mr. Right or Mr. Right Now? Or is he like a Mr. Keeper or something like that? And I was like, I know he said, is he a Mr. Right, like to make a husband, or is he Mr. Right Now? And I can remember thinking like at that time, like, I wanted to be like Mr. like, I don't know why this is so stupid, but I wanted to be Mr. Right. I was like, what do you mean by that? He's like, well, Mr. Right Now is like who you want to go home with and hook up with, but like Mr. Right's like who you want to keep, like husband material. And I was like, this is such a dumb conversation, but I was like, I hope he says Mr. Right. He was like, no, he's a Mr. Right. And I can remember being like, oh my God, that's such a compliment. Well, why would you think that that was such a compliment? More than, okay, like they're hot enough to take home for a night. You know what I mean? But like, why do we think that way? Well, I think that goes back to my need to constantly be, you know, desired and wanted, because then that validates who I am as a person, you know, and I had to work through a lot of that, you know, I had to work through a lot of that to realize that I'm good enough to validate myself. I don't need exterior validation from other people, you know, and what's interesting is the more that I validate myself and the more I love myself, the more people choose me because they see that in me, right? Like, I don't know about you, but I am not super attracted to needy, desperate people. That's just how I don't mean that as any offense to anybody, but I'm just not, you know? And I never really have been. I never really have been attracted to people that are smothering or super needy. I'm always kind of like, give me my distance a little bit, you know? So it's interesting because I think I probably played that role a lot in the past, and I didn't really know that, you know? I don't know if I were going to suggest to you on how to stop being codependent. I'd say get the book Codependent No More by Melody Beatty and find a good therapist or counselor and start working on the issue. That's what I did, you know? I don't know. I wish I'd fixed it years before, though. I wish I'd fixed it years before because it completely changed the context of my relationship with my husband. You know? I mean, it gave me complete freedom to be and say and do whatever I want to do in this relationship, be who I want to be, right? You know? And I think I was really, really scared of all of that. It was like, can I have what I want and still be myself in a relationship? I was even scared to just like dance around and be silly in front of Alex for like our first year together, because I was like, he's not going to like me and then he's not going to want to be with me if I'm being stupid. Now those are the things that make him laugh, you know? I don't know. I would get the Codependent No More book by Melody Beatty. I think it's fantastic. And find accounts. I always suggest professional help, you know? So anyway, that's just my personal experience with it. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I love you guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.